before I turn it over to Nick, our executive director of the commission, this is part of Broadway's effort to generally solicit contributions, engagement, participation, different sections of our community, in general, both to inform our work and also to use the work of the commission as a teaching moment for the district. So it's an important part of public policy. It's important that we have this involvement. So we're very, very happy that you're here. And with that, maybe it would also be good to go around the room and do this if you didn't, I apologize. Folks who are on the commission introduce themselves to us.
Steve Kranz with the McDermott, Will and Emery law firm.
Sheila Brooks, SRB Communications.
Angela Franco, DC Chamber of Commerce.
Brianne Dornbush, Executive Director of District Bridges.
Roger Agarwal, President Provoke and Board Member Think Local First DC.
Andy Shalal, CEO and founder of Busboys and Poets and Board Member of Think Local DC.
All right, good. Well, good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Nick Johnson, I'm Executive Director of the Tax Revision Commission. This is a formal meeting of the Tax Revision Commission. Several other commission members were hoping to attend, but allergies and whatnot fell with a few of them. But we are recording and we are live streaming to the public, and so I know folks will be eager to catch up with all the good information we're going to be here today. Really appreciate you all being here. This is the first of a series of public input sessions that we're doing over the next 3 weeks. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview of both sort of the process we're in and today's conversation, and then give you all a chance to share a little more about your thoughts relevant to today's topic. And some of you have been following the commission pretty closely, so some of the things I'm going to say are a little bit of a repeat for you, but I hope you'll bear with me, so let's start on the same page. Every 10 years, as you know, the DC Council of Mayor appoints an 11-member commission to do a careful review of the overall tax system of the district. The last commission in 2013 advanced some major changes, in which the council and mayor did adopt. So we have high hopes that our work will translate into some public policy this time around. Much has changed since that commission met back in 2013, particularly in the last few years. The economy, tax base, and priorities will evolve. And so we feel like we have a really important opportunity through this commission process to rethink the tax system from top to bottom and propose to the mayor and council a set of recommendations that, number one, follow the data and are based on sound research. Number two, are shaped by the experiences and needs of people across the district from a diversity of perspectives. And number three, are devised collaboratively to enable bold and thoughtful change. So in our recommendations that we'll be developing over the course of this commission's calendar year, the commission has agreed as a body that it will aim to achieve the following four broad goals. This is very much in line with the statutory change that came from the council and the mayor. Number one, a broader, resilient tax base for a post-COVID economy in order to protect against economic shifts and shocks, and to ensure future funding for high-quality public services and share tax burdens fairly across the community. Number two, progressivity and racial equity in order to eliminate racial disparities, protect low-income residents, and lift up our middle class. Number three, economic efficiency and competitiveness to advance growth and prosperity for all residents in the district. Number four, simple, open, and fair administrative processes in order to reduce compliance burdens for residents and businesses. Hey, hi. So, you all represent important constituencies here in the district, and so we're really eager to hear from you today. And we've got several other options for engagement over the next coming weeks. We want to hear about what shifts you think can help us reach these goals and build a healthy and thriving district for the decade to come. So over these 3 weeks, we've got about 10 meetings teed up with various groups of key stakeholders who could bring different points of perspective for deliberations. We're also holding 2 public meetings at which members of the general public can present their perspectives. There's one May 1st in person, and there's one virtually on May 4th. And then we're also meeting with ANC commissioners generally this coming Thursday. Our job as commissioners and staff in all of these sessions is really to listen and learn. Where we are in the process is we have not ruled anything in or out. We haven't had conversations about what should be in or out. It's really been a listening and learning process. And so we're definitely hearing people a lot. We have heard a lot about some of the challenges that we face, and I'm sure some of them will come up today. Changes in the economy that's affecting the district's revenues. Different ways in which taxes hit hardest at those with least ability to pay. Tax breaks that are cut within the tax code that benefit only a few. The challenges of operating under the Home Rule Act in the federal context that shields Maryland, Virginia commuters and others from tax. Economic competition from our neighbors. Aspects of the tax code that reinforce racial inequities, and of course the fact that people find the tax system just too complicated and hard to deal with. So these are all things that we've heard about, and I'm just a partial list. These challenges tend not to lead directly or super clearly to solutions. You know, we've got technically challenging situations, we've got complex trade-offs. So we're hearing a lot about different policy options, and earlier this year, we produced a list of those policy options that we've heard about from various sources. We're continuing to grow and develop that list, and look forward to adding to it in the course of this conversation. Over the summer and into the fall, we're going to continue listening, but we're going to also, the commission will begin to refine and narrow down actual potential policy options. The goal is that by December, to agree on a final package of recommendations. And so as we continue to refine and develop these proposals, we'll be continuing to post them on the website and discussing them publicly in public meetings. You all and other stakeholders and other members of the public will have additional chances to weigh in, so it's not like this is your only chance, especially as we sort of narrow in and home in on specific ideas as they bubble up and sort of come into more focus. And then, of course, there will be the package as a whole and another chance to and we know that we have a really hard job. We know that unlike the last commission back in 2013, which, you know, its recommendations were being implemented at a time of relative budget surpluses, rapidly growing revenues, we're at a time right now of constrained revenues. A lot of the provisions that were enacted as part of the last tax revision commission's recommendation on net cost DC revenues, and that was, you know, that had one kind of impact at the time of budget surpluses. It's not at all clear that policymakers this time around are going to have that option. Anyway, so today's conversation is very much like a listening, learning. We're happy to answer questions you might have and do have about our work and suggest about how we can do it better. And we definitely want this to be a conversation, but our purpose is to let your ideas. So you're not going to hear opinions from us. We're going to try to refrain from saying, hey, that's a great idea. I love that. We're just not at that point in the process. That said, I hope we will ask probing questions, good questions, so we really understand what you're saying. And so we ask you hard questions, it's just another way of understanding better what you're saying. So try not to read too much. I'll ask other commissioners if they want to add to what I've rattled off here. But in a second, I want to go back around the room, and if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself again, name, organizational affiliation, word pronouns, if you're comfortable sharing those. And maybe just provide a 2 or 3 minute summary of what community or perspective you represent at this table, and your priorities and ideas for our work. I did, you all got an email, we invited you to submit comments in writing in advance. We got one from the chamber, thank you very much, and one from Steve, thank you very much. Appreciate those hugely. And others, it's not too late after this meeting to share your thoughts in writing. After we get through this conversation, we will wrap up on time. We will be both making the recording available on our website, but also we will be writing up a one-page sort of thematic summary of every conversation. We'll try to be making content of this conversation available to commissioners who aren't here as well as so I'm just really grateful to all of you for being here. I think it's going to be hugely helpful for us going around. Let me just see Williams, Gregory, Yeshua, Eric, David. Anything you want to add to what I just said?
One thing is everyone speak loudly and clearly because we're having some trouble hearing.
Okay, so we are speaking that weird looking thing in the middle. Our owl occasionally makes these hooting noises.
It's gonna stop.
But it is videoing and hopefully hearing. Did they really hear what I said? My voice?
We've just heard it's quiet, so, but you're far away, just,
I'm far away, yeah.
Everyone speak up a bit.
Tactical mistake to start is for me to be far away, but I'm not doing most of the talking here, so you guys are closer, but that'll be good. So we'll just do this popcorn style. Does anybody want to volunteer to go first? Again, name, organization, 2 or 3 minutes about who you are, what perspective you represent, and specific ideas you want to bring to them.
And we can start.
Awesome.
So, good afternoon. My name is Angela Franco. I'm the president of the DC Chamber of Commerce. We represent over 1,100 members. And some of the ideas that we brought today are a result of meetings that we hosted with our members. I'm not an expert in taxes, so there were conversations and discussions around what can be done better and some ideas that we could bring forward to make the system better. So I'm going to start. I have here Brett Allen, that is the Director of Government Relations and Public Policy, and Kevin Reggie, that is a consultant in government relations. So they're going to also provide input as we go. So the first one that we have is index the district's tax brackets to account for inflation. So basically, when we increase the salary of a person, not necessarily brings them to a higher income or a better or bring them to a higher income. It's just basically to cover the inflation cost. And the tax brackets can increase, especially when you're looking at people that make $60,000 and under. So it's something that we look into. I don't know if you want to add something to that, Kevin or Brett.
No, I think you covered it.
Okay. The second one that I'm gonna let you, Kevin, talk about this is adopt the state and local taxes workaround. You can expand on that.
Sure, yeah, just very, very briefly. We know that there are dozens of states that have come up with approaches to essentially provide routes for taxpayers to continue to take deductions at the federal tax level for state and local taxes. It's a big new burden on our residents, and we know, because I've talked with staff here, that this is a complex area. I wouldn't begin to wade into how the best mechanisms for this, the chamber would not, but we think it's worth study and consideration because of the positive impact that such a workaround, were it to be successful, would have for high earners and really earners at all levels who would find a way to take those deductions at the federal level. No revenue, no meaningful revenue impact here in the district, but a way to provide some benefits for taxpayers here in the district.
The next one is exempt DC restaurant labor surcharges from the sales tax. So we know there's going to be an additional sales tax for the labor surcharges. The next one is mandate economic impact statements for this legislation. And even though this is not a tax issue per se, it's something that can become a tax issue in the future if we don't link the legislation that is moving forward with a cost attached to it. And it's a conversation that we have all the time in terms of, okay, how much it's gonna cost to implement. But it's important that we really start establishing some mechanisms in that we understand how much that's gonna cost and what's that gonna mean for our communities. And then we got a statement from one of our committee members about addressing and tackling tax administration fairness and transparency issues. He put together a document in some recommendations in how that can be worked better and maybe some implementation processes that can be implemented to improve the transparency that are part of the documents we sent. Is there anything else you would like to add?
I think the last thing is just ensuring that what recommendations come out of this committee, that they had some vetting or that they're tried and true practices in other jurisdictions. That oftentimes we won't be alone in coming up with these recommendations. There'll be firm examples of their advocacy in other jurisdictions. So just keep an eye out for what's going on everywhere else.
Great, thank you. And I apologize, I did not give you guys a chance to introduce yourselves.
So I'm Brett Allen. I'm Director of Government Relations and Public Policy at the Chamber.
Kevin Riggy, I have my own advocacy firm, but I'm consulting, and this is my role with the Chamber today as their consultant.
So thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to suggest that we go around. I know we have more questions for you all, but I'm going to suggest that we go around, let others have a chance to share, again, high-level overview of where you guys can put on the table, and then we'll get into some questions and hopefully discussion.
I'll go next. I'm Sheila Brooks. I am CEO of SRB Communications. I also represent a group called the President's Club of DC. There's 10 of us who have been in business for more than 25 years in downtown DC, and we have more than $3 billion in revenues collectively in assets in our small businesses. I want to just talk a little bit about the tax system and how it should help improve racial equity. In an effort to really eliminate some of these disparities that really help us improve racial equity. One recommendation might be to implement some kind of a tax break for business owners, particularly minority business owners or women business owners and African-American business owners. We thought of it much like what Mayor Muriel Bowser has suggested in her comeback plan and the Strike Force on Home Ownership plan to have, she mentioned then, she's looking for 20,000 net Black homeowners by 2030, maybe possibly recommending that the Tax Revenue Commission do something similar to that. That would certainly encourage a more racial equity and more business owners to stay here in Washington, D.C., because we've lost, as we've reported so many times over the last few years, particularly because of COVID, more than 2,300 small businesses have shut down. So that could help us dramatically. And then any other specific ideas on how to improve the tax administration? We know that there's the work opportunity tax credit that employers can take advantage of through the federal tax credit for employers hiring DC residents. But we also know that that's limited. It's limited to veterans and ex-felons and students and more. So maybe thinking of a way that we can revise it to include some benefits for small business owners as well. But we also believe that there is a need for an education awareness campaign or something, because so many small businesses don't really realize when there are these kinds of tax benefits, what's available to them. And it is so important that while we may think they know, they really don't know. And we have to really educate them, inform them, and something like that needs to be there if we're going to make a few changes around, or recommendations for changes around racial equity or around anything that has to do with tax benefits for small businesses. Thank you.
I'm happy to go. So Steve Kranz with McDermott, Will and Emery. Many, many years ago, Matt Gandhi called me and said, leave the Department of Justice and come work for me. There's this incredible CFO in DC. He wants to clean up the tax system. You're a tax lawyer. We need your help. And I came over, worked under the CFO then, and sitting here with us today and tried to work in OTR as the general counsel to Gandhi. And we cleaned up the law in some respects, worked with Councilman Catania and Jack Evans, and really tried to clean up the administration of DC's tax system. As a tax lawyer now with 20 years of experience representing taxpayers, I see new problems emerging and identified seven of them in the document that was submitted. I can talk about them at length or briefly, but many of them are caused by OTR's computer system. And it's unfortunate, but there's a case reported at the DC Court of Appeals from a decade ago that went all the way to the Court of Appeals, a taxpayer who was having problems with OTR's computer system. It kept insisting that this taxpayer owed money, and they had to litigate all the way up to prove that they didn't, at great expense to the taxpayer. OTR's computer system is still full of problems, and today I've got 7 items. The first thing it's doing is, rather than sending out notices, so let's say that you file a tax return in DC, rather than sending a notice saying your return has been adjusted, audited, and here's your proposed tax bill, the notices are simply posted online at mydctax.gov. Well, there are some people who don't have computers, right? And they can't access that. And what obligation should you have to go check every month to see if you have a notice that there's a proposed assessment? You have 30 days to contest that notice if you get one. So it's a concept of secret notices that I object to. The second problem is the double standard for statute of limitations. You file a tax return. The law says that the government has 3 years to audit your return. If they don't audit it, the year is closed and everybody moves on. Well, OTR's system, the way that they're viewing the law, which we think is wrong, says if you get that 3-year statute of limitations, if you're a W-2, you receive a paycheck from an employer. But if you make estimated tax payments, which is what every partner in a law firm, accounting firm, or any other firm does, or if you make estimated sales tax payments, which is what every restaurant and retail does, you're estimating your payments. If you make estimated payments, you do not get a statute of limitations in DC as a result of how OTR and its computer system are treating taxpayers. That's a serious problem for business and individuals. There's also repeat issuance of wrong notices by OTR and no clear path for those notices to be revoked, repealed, undone. There needs to be some mechanism for an incorrect notice of enforcement or collection activity to be undone by the agency. And right now, there's no formal process. That problem is exacerbated in part by the agency's, what I think of as unilateral movement of your tax dollars. Let's say that you make an estimated payment with your 2019 tax return, and your estimate is more than your liability for 2019. Well, on the bottom of your return, what do? You say, give me a refund or roll that money forward to next year. Well, if you have an estimated payment on your return, OTR views that as their money to play with and move wherever they want. So they can move it to 2018, 2016. It frees them up from the statute of limitations and allows them to seize your money and move it anywhere. That's just the you know, a few years ago, DC created the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate, and we all thought, this is great, there's going to be someone who is responsible to hear taxpayer complaints and work with the agency to fix these problems. Unfortunately, the reality is that the office was created, it was given zero authority. So for the existence of the taxpayer advocate position, there was a person there, she's since left the job, but she had no authority to do anything. So she would try to fix problems and the agency would say, no. They would refuse to cooperate. So it has accomplished, the taxpayer advocate has accomplished nothing. The federal level, that's very different. It is an office that has authority to tell the IRS no, and tell them to fix problems and stop collection issues or audit problems from moving forward. That doesn't exist in DC. And then the final point that I would make is they're you know, seeing these examples play out and being in the role of litigating these problems for clients of ours. It's very frustrating when we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of a client's money litigating to fix a problem. And when we do, we prove that the taxpayer owed nothing or they're entitled to a refund, the client's still out hundreds of thousands of dollars for their legal fees. This is one of the few jurisdictions that does not authorize its court system, the Office of Administrative Hearings or DC Superior Court, to compensate taxpayers when they're right, when they've had to prove that they're right. So that is a simple fix. That would require legislation. The taxpayer advocate role, giving authority there, would require legislation. The rest of the items on our list are really administrative and could be fixed by instructing the agency to do things.
On the question on the taxpayer advocate, you're saying the federal level IRS is good. Are there any states that you think are particularly good?
New York has a history of a very strong taxpayer advocate. I don't know what their law says, but I do know from experience that if you have a problem in New York State, their taxpayer advocate has been able to solve it.
And this notion where DC creates its own big bank or its own escrow, good examples of other jurisdictions where there isn't that flexibility on the part of the collector, the state or the county or the city.
I've never, in my 20-some years in private practice, I've never seen another state.
We really are that unusual.
These administrative problems are unheard of, and I love my upbringing in DC in the tax world here. Most of my work is elsewhere in the country. I represent large companies who have big great problems in California and Illinois and Texas and all over the country. We still do a nice clip of business in DC. Most of my work is elsewhere though, and I have never run into these problems in other jurisdictions.
Thank you very much.
Side of the table, want to go next?
I wanted to ask about, actually more a question of clarification, is the clean hands thing that we have to do here for anything that we have to do with the city tends to be somewhat unfair for people that really want to get ahead somehow. We have managers that they have to have their liquor license approved through the ABC here in DC, and if they don't have clean hands, they can't move forward. And it really sets them way behind. Having even a few $100s for some people could be, unattainable and not easy to get, and therefore it pulls them out of the labor market in an unfair way. So I don't know if there's a way to get around that, because oftentimes it does have to do with a glitch in the computers. It does have to do with other things that may not be within their control, and they end up really falling behind, and either having to lose their job or having to take a lower job that doesn't require them to have the ABC license in hand.
Is that primarily tax or is that just also whatever DCRA is called now.
It's quite often a tax issue that becomes the bigger problem. The other stuff, having a ticket or something like that is a little bit less of a hassle. You can figure it out, but for whatever reason, OTR is like, it's hard to navigate. And I think a lot of it has to do with, insurmountable problems that they throw in front of you that you feel you can't get beyond without having to go through a long, lengthy process to figure out what the problem is.
Yeah, well, not to keep beating up that horse, but what jurisdiction do a good job of, obviously you have to provide an internal integrity and internal control and compliance, but you gotta balance that with getting people into work. I'm
Exactly.
interested to know who does that well,
I don't know, honestly. I know that in other jurisdictions, we don't have to go through the clean hands process, so I know in Maryland and Virginia, we don't have that issue. But in DC, we do. And I guess there's no clean hands requirement in other jurisdictions, I assume.
Or maybe only for government, other people,
There are clean hands. We have to go through that for the state of Maryland.
And for the state of Maryland?
Yes, we do.
But for employees to be able to get their,
Not for employees to be able to get theirs, just for the business owners.
that's maybe a little
That
different.
might be a little
Yeah.
different.
That's a
Different.
important point, we should definitely.
Yeah.
And Clean Hands also negatively impacts nonprofits. I recently heard of an organization that wasn't able to get their clean hands, even though they had it clean hands 2 years ago. And now they say that there's a DOES issue where they have to go back 10 years of DOES reports to indicate that they actually have clean hands when they already had multiple years of clean hands before that. So this constant reiteration of new roadblocks that emerge that weren't there before constantly happen. And they are not, OTR, DOES are purposefully, at least the experience is inaccessible to other people unless you have power and privilege through council people or people in this room.
Mayor Williams, I do some work for another client, the Institute for Justice, who's very supportive of reasonable restrictions, but not unreasonable runs in this realm of clean hands. And they've done some work nationally on this issue, so I'd be happy to reach out to them to see if they have some data for you on how other jurisdictions are approaching this problem.
The other thing I think that, and I hear you about the integrity of the system and all of that, but possibly putting some garnishment or something to allow the person to at least get the opportunity to bring in income. That might be an option, at least as a temporary option for folks to be able to get through.
Yeah, like a temporary clean hands while they maybe clean up the system.
Exactly. I think that would be really helpful.
Well, yeah.
The other part, I think I want to piggyback what Angela said about the added service charges that have become sort of ubiquitous now in many restaurants, when you go in, many service organizations. And the idea of how do we deal with that from a tax perspective? The way it works now, if you don't require tipping, that is not considered income. But if tipping is added, that is considered income, and that becomes taxable. So if you get this, and not only does it become taxable, but from a business perspective, it also adds to your revenue line, which can bring you into having to pay more rent. So you're not only being taxed more, but you also your rent may have increased as well. It creates, I think, enough for businesses in that regard, and makes it less likely for business to want to add that, and then that hurts the employee.
And when you add a service charge to basically meet the new minimum wage requirements of the law, is that charge also subject to sales taxes?
Yeah.
That's just a fact, that's what you're saying is the concern that it's income to the, if it gets turned into wages, that's obviously income to the employee. That's a shame, but there were questions about sales tax.
Yeah, that's the issue.
And lastly, what I wanted to say is,
One thing on that, Andy.
so
Do you have a concern about whether or not people that are adding the amount are actually getting that getting those wages to the workers, or possibly?
No, I'm not as much concerned with that. I assume they should be, but if it says so. But I also think that from a reporting perspective, it could create problems as well, because people may not know, may not be aware, and then they get audited, and then it's a real problem. So I think there's a lot of layers on that needs to be clarified. And it's not problematic.
Yeah, and the sales tax on, let's call it a labor charge. Yeah, sales tax on a labor charge was not legislated by the council, it's just OTR's interpretation of the law. And I don't think they're wrong, you know, unless labor charges are specifically carved out when they're associated with food, they would be part of the sales price of the food. So there, if you want to fix that, it would require legislation.
Well, it is, and it's not, because it's, right now, because of the sub-minimum wage that we have for service, it's not truly like a normal labor charge. It's an additional pay, and I think it came through because of COVID and all the challenges that I think many restaurants are facing and workers were facing during that period of time, that it seemed necessary to add that. So, you know, people are afraid to add prices to the menu, so they try to do it in a way that's more hidden. That's one way to do it, but
So could this be a
but creates problems.
when the minimum wage starts increasing?
It may become less of an issue once the sub minimum wage matches the regular prevailing minimum wage. But
That we're talking about here is in front of us.
yeah. And the last thing I wanted to mention was, every time I turn around that year, the city is awash with money. You know, and I think for a lot of people, for them to feel, you know, good about their tax system, they need to see tangible results that money is producing, i.e. in housing and other things that I think all of us are have some concerns about. So I'm trying to figure out, I think you mentioned earlier that that things are changing now, and there's less available in the DC budget. Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah. And so
In
that's
comparison to 2013, right? We're in a
in
deficit.
comparison to 2013.
Right, the red, speak more.
I can talk about that. I mean, even though the COVID really shook the district's economy, we had a lot of support from the federal government that's helping our budget to stay. We also saw the impacts of COVID with delay in the commercial office market, because our commercial tax assessments are backwards looking 2 years. This year is the first time we really experienced the impact of commercial values declining. You know what's happening in downtown. And next year it's just going to get harder, because we will lose the federal funds, they expire. Schools are being getting federal funds, they'll expire. In addition, the metro will experience a significant deficit, and the 3 jurisdictions will have to come together and pay for it, and that's not in our spending capacity. So those are all doing the squeeze on the district's budget. This year is bad. My expectation next year is going to be even harder.
I think people need to know that, because I think the impression is a little different than that, and I think the expectations need to be managed of what is available and how it's being spent. That's a budget issue, obviously, also, but from a tax perspective, if there's an interest in, let's say, raising taxes, that needs to be clarified. Thank you.
So I'm Brianne Dornbush, I'm Executive Director of District Bridges. We support over 1,200 small businesses through our 6 Main Street programs and our work with Access Point DC, which is an online technical assistance platform. And when we talk about small businesses, we're talking about micro businesses, under 15 employees mostly. And so a lot of the challenges, Steve, that you talked about with My Tax DC, if language access is an issue, if the digital divide is an issue, those businesses are not checking, so they're out of compliance. And often when our Main Street managers or our technical assistants, coordinators come in contact and they're doing their outreach with small businesses, we only learn about the issues when they're at a critical point. And so sometimes there's no fixing the problem. They need to close. That's their only option. They don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight a case, even if they are not liable for the taxes. We actually had a small market on Georgia Avenue that had that exact situation where she had all of the receipts showing that she had made payments during the correct periods, and OTR said, no, you did not. And ultimately, it took us 3 years, and the computer was wrong. And the response was, sorry. And she was unable to receive funds for 3 different grants that would have helped her business grow, expand. She is still somehow amazingly in business, but that story could have been very, very different. She hung out by the skin of her teeth. And so it disadvantages small businesses who don't have the ability to fight for themselves. They don't have the time. Sometimes they don't even have the knowledge base. I am by no means a tax expert. I do not have the magic bullet to solve all of these issues. But we do have the voice of the small businesses, and we understand the challenges that they're facing. And so, Sheila, to your point earlier about education, we are a community ecosystem development organization. So it's not simply about, we put out a flyer that said this is how the tax code works. It's about actually sitting with those business owners, with trusted individuals who know them, who can help them understand on their level what they need to understand. The Main Street approach is a very hands-on approach. So our Main Street managers are on the ground building relationships with those small businesses. And so helping the organizations that are supporting these organizations understand the implications of tax changes is incredibly important. Another really important issue that we're very focused on is commercial gentrification and policies that can promote anti-displacement. So particularly along Lower Georgia Avenue, we see a lot of small businesses being actively pushed out simply because the property taxes are growing exponentially, and the small businesses through triple net leases, those property taxes are passed down to the tenants. And so as you have an organization like Sankofa, a Black-owned business that's been on Georgia Avenue for decades, they were able to advocate for a tax abatement for the property tax for 10 years, which was wonderful. They were able to sustain their business, which is a valuable cultural asset to the corridor. But not every business has the ability to do that advocacy. They don't have access to the right people to be able to make that case. And so it shouldn't be, if you have the loud enough voice and you have access that you can get that support, it should be more equitable so that we can preserve those neighborhood serving small businesses, particularly those who have institutionally not been invested in. And so this is a very interesting conversation. We don't have any of those, like I said, we don't have the silver bullet or policy recommendations that we think are particularly important, but we are very happy to bring the voice of the small business to the conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to go. Thank you, Dan. So I'm Raj Agrawal. I'm president and founder of a local DC business called Provoke. We've been in business here in the district for over 20 years. And 15 years ago, Andy and I started the Think Local First DC, which was basically an organization helping to promote the importance of independent local small businesses that Brianne does day in and day out. I'm also on the board of the Fresh Farm and French Chiliville Foundation, and I also serve on the board of the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. So I really come here as also an advocate for business owners and also for thinking about the people that have been most marginalized in our community. When I think about raising revenue and taxes, and we think about how that can benefit the people that need it most, it's about taxing people with incomes over 250K and above, and making sure that, and that's not for households, but for individuals, and making sure that they are paying their fair share of taxes. It's making sure that there's higher property tax on higher net worth homes. I live in Mount Pleasant. My house has increased $500,000 since I bought it about 10 years ago. So I'm really benefiting from that. And I say that as a person who will be taxed, so not a person who's pretending that it's not going to impact me, but I'm happy to pay my taxes. We think that the state and local deduction from tax cuts should be capped, that are capped for people that itemize. We know that only the people that itemize are the people like me and my friend Andy here who can itemize their taxes and therefore get the benefit from it. We know that people who earn less don't actually do that, and therefore they don't benefit from that, from the tax cut there. On the labor surcharge, I do have some concerns about that, and I think that there need to be some ways, because I think some people are starting to add that to their bills, but that isn't always going to the workers. And I do believe that maybe that should be taxed, but I'm not a restaurateur, so I'm happy to continue that conversation with you later. When I think about, again, the tax code, and again, I'm not a tax expert, I'm just a tax-paying citizen and happy to do that. Is that, one of the things that we can do to end poverty is by advancing the child tax care credit. That's just something that was really pushed for in this past cycle, and something that we're considering piloting here in DC. It could really help the folks that need it most. I've done work on this nationally. I've helped to run campaigns in different cities, states of doing this, and the impact has been phenomenal on individuals where they piloted this. I think that the commercial tax code that's being considered and also in the mayor's budget should be really rethought. I really see this as a handout to developers, who many are my friends, and I know this is being recorded. We have oversold commercial space and have continued to gouge commercial tenants, including the people that Brianne has discussed, versus right-sizing leases during this time where we did have a lot of money to encourage tenants to stay. We regularly see iconic DC businesses move out to Maryland and Virginia when these businesses are committed to the district until the very end. I just bumped into Supergirl, which runs a very well-known business in DC. They were in Shark Tank. They received a lot of money. They're national. They're in Walmart all over the country. Warren Brown, he started Cake Love. All these folks moved out of the city because they couldn't afford commercial space in the district. Why are we losing them? When we're saying that we can't rent to people, we can rent to people. The question is that they can't afford it. And then we also don't value the impact that those folks have on the cities. And overall, any tax abatements to developers and in general have not ever proven, and there are a number of studies on this and I'm happy to share them, to ever provide economic benefit to the city. These folks come in, they make promises, and those things never pan out. And so this old idea of giving tax abatements just doesn't work, and we really need to think about other ways of doing it. I know a real concern from developers are that based on the way that the conversions might happen downtown, they are not able to get the capital investment that they need from external sources. But the fact is, often those are not local investments. They're often foreign investments. And as a result, if that's incorrect, please correct me, that often what happens is that money, whoever's making the money off of us investing in those developers, ends up getting extracted from the city. So how can we find more local ways of capitalizing these projects? And that could include the Housing Production Trust Fund, because that is a way to ensure that the money stays local and that the equity provisions in that stay active. So overall, I'm really hoping that we develop a tax code that really we can all think about for our grandchildren and our grandchildren's grandchildren, and not think that we sold out our city just because we're having a little bit of a crunch.
What's your, the point you were making about SO? That's a federal, framework. I'm not sure what DC has to do with SO.
You're talking about the Trump tax credits?
The first one you said is, that state and local tax deduction.
Yeah, the state and local tax deduction. I may be underinformed about that, and
You might not be right. Yeah, we have nothing to do with SO. Now, we have something to do with it if we, like, what I'm inferring from what I heard another speaker say is, I guess apparently some states are trying to work around the SO cap, and you're saying maybe you're told you that we should not try to compensate our high taxpayers with a cap, $10,000 cap or so. And I'm not sure how that helps DC, but that's sorry.
But you already did that, so that's okay.
But that's what we meant to say, even though Tony is right that this is a federal income definition, that I thought what you meant to say was that if you are not itemizing, you're taking the standard deduction. And in your ideal world, people would get the standard deduction and the salt.
You know more than I do at this point.
Perfect.
Yep, I'm totally okay with it.
Mhm.
No. Thank you.
I think you're right. You're talking about what happened at the federal level with itemization and deductibility and how it flows through the district and whether we do something there, which is a very different issue
Very
than
different, yeah.
the SALT deductibility, which DC can solve it. As you said, no cost to the district.
Because Trump tax cuts, both tax and jobs act, I forgot what it was called, actually significantly increased the standard deduction, if I'm correct, and eliminates the personal exemptions.
That's right. But doesn't the personal exemptions, people can actually have more than what the standardized deduction is if they take the time to do the individual ones?
A lot of tax review questions, but most of the time,
I mean, a lot of people don't itemize now because
because
the standard deduction is so high, and so they're not, like, they get a better deal on the taxes from just taking the standard deduction. But, the SALT cap really affects itemizers, not folks who opt for the standard deduction.
Yeah, itemized
And folks who itemize skew higher income.
and in high cost urban areas, right? Your property taxes are higher in DC compared to Charlotte.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in whether the work, like if you have a specific workaround that you're thinking of, or if you're just wanting research done into what options are.
Right, well, in all candor, one of our working group members brought this up, and he's in the room here, and he's has a lot more experience with this SALT workaround issue and many other tax and tax administration issues, so I refer to you on that, Steve.
And this is a conversation Steve and I have been having, we're trying to figure out how to package the material to bring it in a way. Just to have an informal
But
conversation, it's super helpful.
More than 30 states now have adopted legislative solutions for let's be clear. What happened in the TCJA targeted blue states, and all of the blue states have adopted a working solution to it. And some, a fair number of red states as well. So it is an easy fix. It's an easy fix when you're describing the concept. DC's law is a complicated mess, so the technical drafting, I think, will be hard, but the fix itself is easy.
Well, I'm not sure why, if you're a DC taxpayer and you're paying a huge amount of taxes, we would resist an effort to have you enjoy some federal concession for the huge amount of taxes you're paying. What are we gaining as DC by saying, we're just gonna let you sit where you are, as opposed to taxpayers in New York or other blue states where they're trying to help out their taxpayers? I just don't get the logic. I can see how within the DC framework, we want equity and we want parity and we want to go to court for the city. I just don't see what you gain by saying you shouldn't have any kind of SALT deduction. I don't understand
I
that.
guess we get a little bit more income taxes, right? Because that's how we define our income, being our federal definition of income. So when the fund deduction is capped, the taxable income is larger, and DC's taxable income is also the same as the federal adjusted cost. So for DC, that's larger.
Yeah, I guess that's why I'm interested in what the options are and what actual costs are.
Depending on how you actually structure it, the revenue went back on district.
One question, when does the ballpark tax expire?
Like, again,
What?
The ballpark?
Roughly, I've heard 27.
To be honest, it's never going to go away.
Yeah.
It's never going to go away. You pay it?
Oh, yeah.
I pay.
Can I ask a question? Do you mind paying it?
I mean, what happens is you start to become just like a frog in hot water. You become accustomed to paying certain things and you just keep on paying it.
But we're just asking, I'm just
Yeah.
asking, I have a couple of questions. Do you mind paying it?
I do.
Do you mind paying it?
I don't even think about it.
Okay, so it's not an issue.
It's not, right now, it's not an issue, but it might be an issue after today. Because I wasn't cognizant of it, right? So now I am.
All right, well, I'd like to comment on and ask questions about the small business. I think, you're a very interesting voice here because we don't often hear from the very small businesses that are struggling, not the ones who are paying the vault tax, because you have to have $5 million in revenue. Right, so if you're,
Actually, then I don't pay it. Thank you. I didn't
You have to
even
make
know.
5 million.
There you go. Andy pays it, I don't.
so, all right, so if I might return to her.
Sure.
So these are truly small businesses. And, there's an axiom that complex things get more complex with time. And so the city government gets more complex with time. And as the council, continues to impose different responsibilities, burdens, one day you can have a gas stove, the next day you can't, whatever it might be, right? I wonder how small businesses are able to negotiate that world, the regulatory world, and the tax world, when they can't hire people to help them. And then at the same time, the council's making the city so impossibly complicated that small businesses are struggling. The same people criticize businesses who hire people to help businesses figure out what they have done to them. So you see the logic? And so we are gravitating towards a place where only large multinationals will have the wherewithal to operate in the city because they'll have the back offices to figure it out and to maintain compliance.
That's always been.
If I might.
Don't worry, I work with small businesses all the time.
If I might.
Yeah, sure.
Okay?
Uh-huh.
I didn't interrupt you.
Okay.
So just bear with me.
Mhm.
We are in a situation where, we talk about racial equity, but the complexity of our government does more to burden small black and brown businesses than anything, because they can't figure it out. I think your voice is very important. I hope you will submit, my question is, will you submit testimony to that effect, what you stated here publicly, to the commission?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Actually, you know what, I just want to recognize that Carolyn Rudd, another member of our commission, who has joined us online, and I know she's under the weather today, but Carolyn, just feel free to jump in or raise your hand on the screen if you want to ask questions that you want.
And Carol Burnett is joining at 3 p.m. She's from Comcast. Stacy.
Reactions to from anyone or everyone. So we talk a lot about tax fairness, which is, in my estimation, another way of saying doesn't pay their fair share. So we're in a city with a lot of nonprofits. We're in a city with a lot of universities. We have we have the unincorporated franchise tax, which creates sometimes a discrepancy between incorporated stuff. So as you see, as you look through this panoply of taxpayers to DCs, are there people that you think, quite frankly, aren't paying their fair share in terms of businesses or individuals?
Everyone's looking at me.
The question was directed.
Well, so I'll take an example. In Columbia Heights, when Columbia Heights was redeveloped, there was meant to be a TIF that was set aside, and that never materialized. And so that was meant to be something that was reinvested back into the community. And so for those small businesses, there was meant to be a set aside within the DCUSA complex for small businesses. The Staples, the former Staples, soon to be Little, 18,000 square feet, and they wanted over $100 a square foot. So no small business needs 18,000 square feet, so it wasn't built to suit. And $100 a square foot in Columbia Heights is significantly over the market. And so that space remained empty for years, over, probably 6 or 7 years. It's remained empty, and it's going to deliver later this year. But what are the tax implications of the lost sales tax if a business had been in there? The foot traffic for the neighborhood, and not to mention when you have boarded up windows, the impact that has on the cohesion of a neighborhood and the feeling of safety and security and thriving communities. Vacancies have a real impact on on the neighborhood development. And so when we're looking at community-based economic development, how are the vacancy taxes, like you can have the blighted tax, you can have the vacancy tax, are those being enforced? Why are developers holding those properties out for the highest possible rent that they can get versus going with a smaller business that may be they may get less rent over time, but they could get somebody in that day. And that could really have an impact of helping those businesses grow and expand and be valuable constituents in the economic growth of the communities. I think seeing the developers in different neighborhoods throughout the city get those tax breaks for small businesses, they feel like, well, they have the ability to fight for those tax breaks. I don't have that ability. The system's not set up for it. So regardless of whether it is or not, I am not a tax expert. I cannot opine on that point. But if the perception is that those with the most money and the most access have the most advantages, then the small businesses are going to feel left out. And the access to some of those bigger buildings, I think as we're looking at what does the comeback plan for downtown DC, what role does small business have to play? How can small businesses, those micro businesses, have a seat at the table in what that redevelopment looks like so that they have the advantage as our city is building back and growing and the economic base is growing? How can they take advantage of that and actually also grow? And I think a lot of times they're kind of left the wayside and they don't have the voice or the knowledge or the advocates to be able to push the things that would help them forward.
Hey, can I put you on the spot? Yeah. I'm gonna ask you to summarize what one of the speakers we had a month ago, that's from Georgetown, articulated the concept of a business activity tax. Can you summarize that? Because that's going to do justice to it. I want to hear what our guest here today thinks of that.
So I will try, and this is an idea that we're going to try to flesh out. So forgive me if I don't nail perfectly, but essentially the concept is there's a lot of business entities in the district that don't at the entity level. As a result of largely the way the home rule. It's also sometimes a factor that a lot of business entities in a given year may not earn profit for tax purposes. But they may be essentially consuming services the district is producing. So you've got a lot of business entities in the district essentially not paying entity level taxes, but that are consuming services. And so the question is the idea is to create a business activity tax that would apply to a broader, at a very low rate, that would apply to a broader range of businesses. I think part of the idea here is that over time, thinking about the revenue stream, supporting the district and its taxes, a broader tax base may be able to give us a reliable, steady stream of income to support all the services that businesses rely on. Sorry, I'll try to speak up a little. So the idea is to create an alternative form of taxation that would complement existing business taxes. So we already have a business franchise tax. We already have an unincorporated business tax. And the idea, but particularly thinking about business entities that are not paying those taxes, is there a way to bring them into the realm of taxpayers so that you're broadening out the base of entities that are paying tax?
Yeah, and I would just say, Michael, also, I think he did suggest that it would replace the unincorporated business tax.
Yeah.
And that would actually be an easier way to really account for, business income and what they owe. And this would be a new thing. There are some jurisdictions that have had this in place, but they're not very many.
Michigan has it. The way I kind of remind myself about what this is, it's a complicated concept, but the way to think about it is, at least I remind myself, it's essentially a gross receipts tax, except you subtract the money you paid to other firms for goods and services. Just sort of like a value of the tax. And then that would mean a very different tax structure, far less complicated than corporate income taxes on paper. Then if you start looking at how other places that implemented it, it gets very complicated.
I mean, we did, the CFO, and Pittsburgh both said that they thought it would be less complicated.
Or the corporate income, but yeah, that's great.
Well, by less complicated, it is easier to calculate. Take-
Right.
We
The
take the
accounting.
gross receipts, yeah, so the tax return is simple. But designing the gross receipts tax so that it doesn't just destroy certain portions of your economy is, most economists would tell you, don't go to the gross receipts tax. Grocery stores, for example, have gross receipts through the ceiling, right? They're selling volume. The profit margin is nothing. So if you tax gross receipts,
Mine is what they pay for the groceries that they're selling. So
Yeah, I don't think it's exactly the same as a grocery store. Right.
and so what you end up with though is there are businesses, there are industries that have very large receipts, very small net. There are industries that have small receipts, but a big net. And a gross receipts tax structure is we're gonna tax you based on what you're collecting. And
So grocery, right, the grocery receipts actually, like, I think some of the localities in Virginia have, here, just straight up grocery receipts tax, and yeah, you end up getting different revenue. Some of the states that have grocery receipts tax, they'll tax, tax grocery stores at a very low rate to make up for the tax, and so you end up with a laundry list of tax rates for every different sector. I think not get the pure grocery receipts approach, and what we're exploring again, yeah, look for, is grocery, as I said, grocery minus cost of goods sold, which at least solves part of the grocery store problem. You know, Texas has a margins tax that's sort of kind of like this, not exactly. Michigan has had various versions of it at the same time. Like the model that was looked at was the New Hampshire single business, this is enterprise tax, this is activity tax. It's called franchise tax, and maybe one is credit against each other. You're not paying both corporate at that time. You pay the highest two, and yeah, essentially. And oh, it would have a threshold, presumably a threshold for small businesses also. So it's, the folks, Brianna's working with.
I'd appreciate if the chamber wanted to, if we could flesh it out more at an appropriate time. We'd love to hear back from you guys.
Sure. I think this is, when I talk about sort of an ongoing conversations, the development of options, this is the kind of idea that's top on my list for you all. Make it a little more robust.
Can I ask one more question for, are we done at 3?
3:15, and Stacy's joining us, Breen from Comcast, so she'll listen.
Okay, so when she comes out, let her know.
Yeah.
In a few minutes to chime in.
I'm just curious, I mean, Sheila, you spoke to this, and Brianna, I feel like you were speaking to this too, but from a small business perspective, what others in the room think would sort of move the needle on racial equity in business, and whether that's a tax issue or not, or if there are revenue implications for that or not. And just, I think it's great to hear from.
I mean, one of the things I speak, because I've been giving a lot of thought to specifically that issue. I think that one is having some incentives, either for minority-owned businesses or specific industries. And I think that the other area that I've seen that is very important is really getting minority-owned businesses exposed to like certification in cases that may apply, and education. I mean, I always think that access to capital and access to contacts are two key things for minority-owned businesses. I mean, on top of what you were saying about, rent and other areas when you're talking about retailers. But when I think about different industries that are not necessarily retail, but construction, cleaning, A lot of industries where minorities are. I always think that getting them exposed to certification and incentives, somehow, some credits, or, I mean, I don't know exactly how that would work. But that's the way, we are working at the chamber, is creating programs around that. And the way I worked before, specifically with the Latino community, to get them to have access and be part of the community at large.
I would add, we've really been pushing to help small businesses purchase their buildings. So building generational wealth is not just simply like you have the ability to have your small business there, but if they are constantly paying rent to a landlord and they're paying their property taxes and all of the improvements, they're not actually getting ahead. And they're also, they're subject to all of the whims of gentrification and all of those challenges. So creating opportunities for small businesses to purchase their properties. We've looked at a couple different pilot programs. The Property Acquisition Fund, we had worked with Councilmember McDuffie's office. Yes, and we were in those early conversations about what, and you were as well, how we can support businesses in purchasing those buildings. I think developers have a role to play in this as well, in terms of looking at what would commercial condomization of redevelopments look like. So giving small businesses the option of, you've built a big, glorious DCUSA, can a small business actually purchase their condo within that? And how could they develop that or that generational wealth through the purchase of their buildings, to be able to take advantage of those same opportunities that the developers have? And perhaps there are ways that both sides can win. If the developers are willing to do that, and they create some incentives for the developers to do that, but it also gives the small businesses an opportunity to develop that generational wealth.
The best examples of these are Ben Chili Bowl, Lee's Flower Shop, Industrial Bank, all Black owned, multi-generational. The only reason they've been able to exist is because they own their building and they have privacy thing.
But I was gonna ask, does the city have something similar to the SBA 504?
Yes, I mean, I don't know if it is a 504, but DSB has a collateral plan for small businesses.
I think that would be one way to sort of have some sort of guarantee that the city would have to give access to capital for people that are undercapitalized.
Yeah.
So something similar to the SBA 504.
Yeah, and there's micro lending. I mean, there's also the micro lending. I'm not sure to what extent it goes to commercial property, but you know, we can do, with these people working on this, I can find out to what extent that goes to commercial properties.
When you're working with businesses that purchase your property, are you typically working on buildings that are just retail? Or have you been successful in any case where you're just getting something at the retail ground floor of a large office building or a large residential building?
So in one instance, a local restaurant in Mount Pleasant had not been even thinking about whether that was a possibility for them. And so just putting the idea into the owner's mind when their leasing opportunity, or when their renewal came up, they approached their business owner or the property owner about that. We had been looking at doing commercial redevelopment. So there was a block on Lower Georgia Avenue that there were about 6 parcels altogether, and we were looking at combining those and doing affordable housing on top. The dream was affordable housing up top and ground floor retail, commercial condos for the small businesses. The capital stack ultimately didn't quite work out, and we were short on that, and that was right before COVID. So the process moving forward hasn't really, we've kind of paused on that.
So that will require actually creating a new tax law. I'm sorry, I'm going to the creating a new tax law with this new condo, which will be taxed on its own income generating ability.
I don't know. Would it?
I'm kind of curious about that.
There are 2 businesses so far that have benefited from the Place Act. that are able to purchase. That thing that we worked on actually turned into a bill that, but yeah, so there might, that might be a good example.
Well, I can come. No, okay.
Yeah, I can get you the name of it. Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to note that Stacy Burnett has joined us remotely. Thank you so much for jumping on. I know that you were originally scheduled to be part of the session that was intended to follow this one, and that one ended up not having, so we are folding you into this one. So thank you for your flexibility and your patience. And I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself, say a few words about who you're representing and the perspective you're bringing, and then in just a couple of minutes, share your thoughts on priorities that the commission should be thinking about, specific policy ideas, anything else you want us to be aware of. So I hope it's okay to jump to you and put you on the spot. I should say also, maybe you could start by just saying a few words, and let's make sure the technology is working so that we can hear you, because we haven't actually had any speak this afternoon.
Okay, Stacy Burnett. I work at Comcast. I'm the Senior Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs. Can everyone hear me?
Very well.
Great. So I'm excited about having an opportunity to speak with the Tax Revision Commission. The work you're doing is super important. Comcast has been in the District of Columbia for about 21 years, and we routinely donate over $10 million a year with nonprofits and other community-based organizations, because we have a strong interest in not only doing business in the District of Columbia, but making the communities where we provide our products and services better. And so I'm also a DC resident. I'm fully invested in seeing DC become a better place personally, based on my property ownership here in Washington, DC. And one of the things that's very important to Comcast, and I've had conversations with government officials about this, how important it is for Comcast to recognize the investment that companies who've been here a long time have made. And while I'm aware that the government often offers incentives to new companies, I think it might be wise to consider offering tax incentives or some type of tax credit for companies who've been here 15 years or longer, to help them make that tough decision to remain here. I think if during the pandemic, companies who had been eligible to receive some type of tax benefit or credit after being here a certain number of years, some of them may not have moved out of DC like we saw during the pandemic. Lots of people moved their businesses to Virginia and Maryland just because it was less expensive to do business in those communities. And so that's something I'd like to raise with this group on behalf of Comcast, some type of tax credit or incentive for being a long time business owner in this community. I looked at several of the questions that I was sent as after I confirmed that I would be attending this event today. And so by no means am I a tax lawyer. I'm a lawyer, but not a tax lawyer, and I don't know a whole bunch about the tax code. So any recommendations I offer are based on some research and discussions with people in my company. But we would like to offer some written comments after this event that reflect our most important priorities. And so something that I think is important for the group to consider to increase the amount of revenue we receive every year from taxpayers is an ad campaign encouraging people to file their taxes, stating how important it is and what the money is used for, and then also gently reminding them of the consequences of noncompliance. I don't recall seeing ads like that. Maybe they're happening, but it would be worth investing in if that's not happening in the District of Columbia. I've seen that in other communities. I lived in Los Angeles before moving to moving to Washington, D.C. years ago. And that was just a regular thing that happens, these ads that start coming on, encouraging people to file their taxes. Just a consideration. But some other ideas that we have on behalf of Comcast, again, I will make sure we submit something in writing to you. That's all I have for my prefatory statement. I will continue to listen to other people's comments and perhaps provide more comments as this session proceeds.
Thank you, Stacy. I really appreciate it. And it would be wonderful if you would submit a statement. Yes, thank you. Questions? And actually, we are getting close to the scheduled end of the session time. Again, Stacy, I appreciate you chiming in towards the end, and hopefully be part of further conversations. Anything that folks have heard, sorry, commissioners, but also others around the table, you want to lift up before we adjourn?
Thanks everybody for coming with this wonderful continuing series.
Thank you all. Thank you. Very much appreciated. Good afternoon, enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.